A blind girl never knew she had a father, until she met a millionaire CEO at her mother's grave. The cold wind whispered through Willow Grove Cemetery as 10-year-old Emma Hayes stood beside her mother's grave, her white cane tapping lightly against the stones. She gently traced her fingers over the rough surface of the headstone, her touch delicate, reverent, as if trying to memorize the contours of her loss. In her small hands, she clutched a tiny bouquet of daisies, her mother's favorite. From a distance, Ethan Walker watched in stunned silence. The sharp winter air bit through his tailored coat, but he barely noticed. His chest tightened painfully as he took in the fragile figure before him. The same soft brown hair, the same determined chin. Memories, long buried under the weight of his career and regrets, surged to the surface like a dam breaking. He knew, without a doubt, that he was staring at his daughter. Emma knelt by the grave and placed the flowers carefully at the base of the stone. Her small hand lingered for a moment, then retreated to the worn locket hanging around her neck, the only link she had to the woman lying beneath the cold earth. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. So many years wasted. Lies, misunderstandings, choices made in moments of grief and anger. He had believed, he had been told, that the child hadn't survived. But here she was, alive, vulnerable, and utterly unaware of the man whose heart was unraveling at the sight of her. Emma's cane tapped again, and she turned, sensing someone nearby. Her face lifted toward Ethan, sightless but alert. "Hello?" Her voice was soft but carried easily across the still air. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to escape the flood of emotions, the fear of rejection, the shame. But something deeper, something stronger rooted him to the spot. "Hi there," he said, his voice rough from disuse, the words barely above a whisper. "Are you visiting someone special today?" Emma nodded, her fingers tightening on the locket. "My mom." She tilted her head slightly as if studying him with senses sharper than sight. "She loved this place. She said the wind here sounds like angels." Ethan swallowed hard. He remembered her saying that too. He remembered afternoons spent walking these very grounds with her, sharing whispered dreams and stolen kisses among the oaks. "She must have been a wonderful person," he said hoarsely. "She was." Emma smiled, a small brave curve of her lips. She said she used to know someone here, someone important, but she never told me who." The words struck Ethan like a blow. He struggled to breathe, to think. Did she mean him? Had she thought of him even at the end? Emma shifted, her cane tapping lightly against a nearby stone. "Are you visiting someone too?" Ethan nodded, realizing belatedly that she couldn't see the gesture. "Yes," he said aloud. "Someone I should have never lost." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The wind whispered through the trees, stirring Emma's hair and carrying with it the faint scent of earth and memory. Ethan's hand moved almost unconsciously toward the inside pocket of his coat, where he still kept a photograph, worn, creased, of the woman who had once been his entire world. And now, the living reminder of that love stood before him, small and brave and utterly alone. Emma shivered, and Ethan's instincts surged forward. "Here," he said, shedding his coat and carefully draping it over her shoulders. Emma startled slightly, unused to kindness from strangers. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the heavy fabric close. He crouched beside her, unsure how close to get, unwilling to scare her. "I'm Ethan," he said softly. "Ethan Walker." Emma's head tilted again, sensing something in his voice, a tremor of pain, of something more. "I'm Emma," she replied, her smile shy but genuine. Emma Hayes. The name hit Ethan like another blow. Hayes. Her mother's maiden name. Of course. She had protected her daughter in every way she could, even from him. He swallowed the lump in his throat. This wasn't the moment to explain. Not yet. Instead, he stayed kneeling beside her, letting the silence stretch. Not heavy, but warm, tentative, a fragile bridge being built between two souls long separated by lies and fate. Above them, the gray sky wept gentle flakes of snow, dusting the graves and trees in a blanket of white. Ethan watched the first flake land on Emma's hair, and knew, deep in his bones, that he couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not ever again. The foster home Emma lived in was small, worn around the edges, but filled with an earnest kind of warmth. The house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with aging maple trees, their bare branches scratching at the windows like bony fingers in the winter wind. It wasn't much, but it was the only home Emma had ever really known after her mother's death. Inside, Miss Callahan bustled between the kitchen and living room, her gray hair pinned in a loose bun, her floral apron dusted with flour. She wasn't young, and the house wasn't perfect, but she had a stubborn tenderness that made all the difference. Emma could always tell when Miss Callahan was tired, from the heavier shuffle of her steps to the quieter hums of the old songs she sang. Emma sat curled on the worn couch, feeling the familiar patches on the fabric beneath her fingers. She wasn't alone. 4 other kids shared the house, but she often preferred to sit quietly, listening to the world through the vibrations in the floor and the distant sounds of laughter and footsteps. That evening, after returning from the cemetery, Emma touched the edge of the locket around her neck, the cold metal grounding her. Something had shifted inside her after meeting Ethan. She couldn't explain it. A strange pull, like a string, had been tied between them without her knowing. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Walker sat behind the massive desk of his penthouse office, the glittering city lights sprawling behind him like a galaxy. His assistant, Daniel Ross, hovered at the door, hesitating. "You're still here?" Daniel asked. "Meeting's over. You should go home." Ethan didn't look up from the photo in his hand. A photo of Emma's mother, radiant and laughing, taken during a summer long ago. His knuckles whitened around the frame. "I found her, Dan," Ethan said, his voice raw. "I found my daughter." Daniel blinked, stunned. For all the years he had worked for Ethan, through mergers, takeovers, ruthless negotiations, he had never heard his boss sound so fragile. "What are you going to do?" Daniel asked quietly. Ethan finally raised his eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm going to find a way to be her father, if she'll let me." He knew it wouldn't be easy. He wasn't a man who did vulnerability well. Business negotiations, ruthless competition, that he could handle. But a 10-year-old girl who had lived her entire life without him? That was an entirely different battlefield. The next day, Ethan found himself parked a few houses down from Emma's foster home, sitting in a car that was far too expensive for the neighborhood. He watched as she stepped carefully onto the porch, her white cane tapping rhythmically. She was wrapped in a too-thin jacket, her breath puffing in the cold air. Miss Callahan followed behind her, adjusting Emma's scarf with motherly care. The small, familiar gestures twisted something inside Ethan. He had missed so much. His hand hovered over the car door handle. He could get out, introduce himself, make a grand gesture like he would in business, decisive, commanding. But instinct told him that wouldn't work with Emma. He had to be patient, gentle. He couldn't just walk into her life and expect to be welcomed with open arms. He had to earn his place, step by cautious step. As he sat there, uncertain for the first time in years, a plan began to form. He would start by being present, offering small kindnesses without expectation. He would let her see who he was, not as the CEO the world knew, but as a man who had lost something precious and was willing to fight to be worthy of it again. Across town, Emma returned to the living room and reached for her Braille music sheets. She loved music. It was her way of seeing the world. Her fingers danced over the notes, and a soft, hopeful melody began to fill the room. And though she didn't know it yet, Her life was already beginning to change, not through sudden miracles, but through the quiet, persistent beating of a heart that refused to lose her again. The next Saturday, Ethan found himself standing awkwardly at the entrance of Willow Grove Community Center. It was holding a winter fair, a modest event with booths, games, and music, and Miss Callahan had encouraged all the foster kids to attend. Emma stood near a booth where children decorated gingerbread houses. Her fingers moved carefully across the candy pieces, arranging them in patterns she imagined rather than saw. Ethan watched from a distance, nerves tightening his gut. "Go on," Daniel had said before dropping him off. "You've handled boardrooms full of billionaires. You can handle one little girl." Ethan wasn't so sure. He approached slowly, his expensive shoes crunching over the salted pavement. A few other parents glanced at him, his tailored coat, the way he didn't quite belong. But Emma, sensing his approach before hearing it, turned her head slightly. "Is someone there?" she asked. Ethan smiled, though she couldn't see it. "It's me again. Ethan." Emma's lips twitched into a tentative smile. She remembered him. That was a start. "Hi," she said, her fingers never pausing in their careful work. He stepped closer, giving her space. "Your house looks amazing," he said, genuinely impressed by the neat creative structure she had built with candy and frosting. Emma shrugged lightly. "I like building things, even if I can't see them." Ethan knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "I bet you see them better than anyone else." For a moment there was a silence between them, not awkward but thoughtful. Ethan felt a thread of connection weaving itself between them, fragile and precious. But just as he was about to say more, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Emma!" A woman's voice, cold and commanding. Emma flinched, her hands jerking, knocking her candy house off balance. Frosting smeared across her fingers. A tall woman in a stiff gray coat marched toward them, her heels clicking on the pavement. She was severe-looking, with tightly pulled-back hair and a clipboard under her arm. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she said sharply, her eyes flicking briefly over Ethan with open suspicion. "You're not supposed to wander off." "I didn't," Emma said quietly, shrinking in on herself. Ethan rose to his full height, instinctively placing himself between Emma and the woman. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone cool but controlled. The woman's smile was brittle. "I'm Ms. Granger. I'm overseeing Emma's care now." She turned to the girl. "Come along. You don't know this man." Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he forced his voice to stay calm. "I'm just a friend." "Friends aren't allowed," Ms. Granger said sharply. She grabbed Emma's arm. Not hard, but not gently either. Emma stiffened. Her knuckles whitened around the locket at her neck. Ethan took a step forward. "Let go of her," he said, low and dangerous. The woman's eyes narrowed. "If you're interfering with a ward of the state, I'll call the authorities." Before Ethan could respond, Emma spoke. Her voice was small but clear. "He's okay," she said, tugging her arm free. "He was helping me." Ms. Granger hesitated, calculating. She couldn't make a scene here. Too many witnesses. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "But next time, Emma, you stay where you're told." She stalked off, her heels biting into the ground like gunshots. Emma stood frozen for a moment, breathing shallowly. Ethan crouched again, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, but her face was tight. She works for the state now," Emma said, her fingers fiddling with the chain around her neck. "They said Miss Callahan's house is too full. They might move me somewhere else." The words hit Ethan harder than any accusation. They might take her away again, just when he had found her. He forced a calm he didn't feel. "I won't let anything happen to you, Emma." She tilted her head, considering him. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I'm starting to," Ethan answered, just as softly. "And that's enough for me." Emma didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. And in that moment, Ethan realized the road ahead would be harder than he had feared. Winning a business deal was easy. Winning a child's trust, a child who had been taught by life that people leave, promises break, and kindness often comes with strings attached, would be the hardest battle he had ever fought. And he intended to fight it with everything he had. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a quiet presence in Emma's life. He volunteered at the community center where she spent her afternoons, always careful not to overwhelm her. Sometimes he helped hand out snacks or read Braille books aloud during story hour. Other times, he simply sat nearby while Emma practiced her music, careful not to intrude unless she asked for help. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma began to trust him. It wasn't in the big moments, it was in the small ones. She would lean her cane slightly toward him when they walked. She would reach out, trusting that he would guide her hand to the right puzzle piece. Still, shadows lingered at the edges of their growing bond. Ms. Granger had not forgotten. In a cold, gray office downtown, she filed paperwork to challenge Emma's placement. She wasn't acting out of malice, not entirely. The truth was simpler and sadder. Granger believed that people like Emma needed structure, rules, not fairy tales of long-lost fathers suddenly appearing. And she wasn't wrong to notice that Ethan Walker, for all his wealth and connections, had no legal claim to the girl. Without documentation, without proof, he was just another stranger. One afternoon, Ethan sat across from Daniel at a corner booth in a dim diner, frustration bleeding through his usually composed facade. "She's filing for a transfer," Ethan said, staring into his untouched coffee. "Somewhere out of the city. Somewhere I wouldn't be able to reach her." Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "You can fight this. You have resources most people only dream of. Use them." "I don't want to scare her," Ethan muttered. "I don't want her to think I'm buying my way into her life." Daniel was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, Maybe it's not about what you want. Maybe it's about what she needs." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse, surrounded by sleek furniture and glass walls that looked out over the endless sprawl of the city. And he realized, for the first time in decades, all of it, the fortune, the power, the empire, felt hollow. What mattered was a small girl with brave hands and an unbreakable spirit, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. Meanwhile, Emma sat curled in her shared bedroom, tracing the familiar grooves of her locket. Miss Callahan had tried to explain, gently, cautiously, that things might change soon, that new arrangements might be made. Emma said nothing at the time. But as she sat there now, she felt a sharp ache bloom in her chest. She was used to change, used to being moved, like a piece on someone else's game board. But this time, she didn't want to leave. This time, there was someone worth staying for. She thought about Ethan, his steady voice, his warm hand guiding hers when she hesitated. She thought about how he never treated her like she was broken or fragile, how he listened when she spoke. She wasn't ready to call it love. She wasn't ready to call it family. But for the first time in a long time, Emma dared to hope. And hope, once ignited, was a powerful thing. It happened on a cold, rainy Tuesday. Ethan had just finished a late meeting when his phone buzzed with a message from Miss Callahan. "Emma's gone. They took her." The words blurred for a moment as he stared at them, his heart slamming against his ribs. Without thinking, he bolted from the building, not caring that he left a room full of stunned executives behind. Driving through the downpour, windshield wipers frantic against the glass, Ethan gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. Every worst-case scenario tore through his mind. He had promised her. He had sworn he wouldn't let anything happen. And now she was gone. When he arrived at the foster home, Miss Callahan met him at the door, her face drawn and pale. "They moved her this morning," she said, wringing her hands. Didn't even give us time to say goodbye. Some court order. Expedited. Ethan felt the ground tilt beneath him. Where? They wouldn't say. Confidential. She shook her head, tears gathering in her tired eyes. They said it was for her own good. For her own good. As if being ripped away from the only people who cared for her could possibly be good. Miss Callahan pressed a crumpled slip of paper into his hand. Emma managed to leave this. It was a note, scrawled in shaky braille on a piece of scrap paper. I don't want to go. Please don't forget me. Ethan closed his eyes against the wave of helpless rage that rose inside him. No. He would not lose her again. Across town, Emma sat on a hard bed in a sterile, unfamiliar room. The air smelled like bleach and sadness. She clutched her locket, fingers trembling. Ms. Granger had told her this was a better facility. More resources, stricter rules. No distractions. No risky emotional entanglements. Emma didn't care about any of that. All she wanted was to go back. To the house with creaky floors. To Miss Callahan's gentle humming. To Ethan's steady, patient voice. She wiped at her cheeks, furious with herself for crying. She had learned long ago that tears solved nothing. But this time she wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, someone was fighting for her. She just had to hold on. The next morning, Ethan stormed into a lawyer's office. Not just any lawyer, but one of the best family rights attorneys in the state. His name was Marcus Hale, a sharp, seasoned man with silver hair and sharp eyes. She's my daughter, Ethan said without preamble, throwing the locket down on the polished desk. Inside it was a picture. Emma's mother, smiling in a field of daisies, and a tiny photo of a newborn. Emma. Marcus studied it carefully. DNA? He asked. Ethan shook his head, shame burning in his gut. No, I didn't know. I was told she didn't survive. His voice broke slightly. I need to fix this. Marcus leaned back, thinking. We have a path, he said slowly, but it won't be easy. What do you need? Ethan asked. Proof of paternity. Evidence that you tried to step in when you found out. Character witnesses, and... Marcus hesitated. You'll need to convince a court that moving her again, especially into your custody, is truly what's best for her. Ethan leaned forward, determination burning through his grief. I'll do whatever it takes. Marcus nodded, impressed despite himself. Good. Because the woman who filed for her removal, Ms. Granger, she's pushing for permanent state guardianship. And she's got influence. A heavy silence fell between them. This wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a war. But for Emma, Ethan would fight it with everything he had. That night, in the sterile room, Emma sat in darkness. She ran her fingers over the locket again and again, tracing the worn edges, remembering. Suddenly the door creaked open. Footsteps. Emma stiffened. A kind voice, not Granger's, spoke gently. Emma, there's someone here who wants to see you. Hope flared so sharply in her chest that it hurt. Carefully she rose to her feet, cane in hand. She didn't need to see. She felt it. She knew. And when Ethan's voice, thick with emotion, said her name, Emma, she flew toward him without hesitation, colliding against him in a fierce, clumsy hug. Tears slipped silently down Ethan's face as he knelt and held her, shielding her from a world that had failed her too many times. I found you, he whispered. I'm not letting go, not again. And in the small, battered heart of a blind girl who had spent her life learning to survive, something fragile and extraordinary took root. She believed him. For the first time, she truly believed. The moment Ethan and Emma embraced, the sterile hallway around them seemed to dissolve into nothingness. But reality crashed back quickly as a uniformed staff member cleared her throat awkwardly. Sir, You can't take her out of here without legal clearance. Ethan stood slowly, still holding Emma's hand. His voice was steady but carried an authority that brokered no argument. I'm not leaving without her. The staff member hesitated, torn between protocol and the sight of the little girl clinging fiercely to the man as if he were the only safe place in the world. In the end, she didn't force it. Instead, she made a call. By the time Marcus Hale arrived, briefcase in hand and papers ready, Ethan was pacing the lobby like a caged lion, Emma sitting quietly nearby, fingers still clutching the hem of his coat. Marcus waved a stack of documents triumphantly. Emergency custody hearing. Tomorrow morning. I pulled every string I could. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a chance. A second chance. He crouched down in front of Emma, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Tomorrow, we're going to talk to a judge, and I'm going to tell them everything. About how much you matter, about how much I want to be your dad. But only if you want that too. Emma's sightless eyes lifted toward his voice. For a moment she was silent, her small hands trembling slightly. Then, with a fierce, determined nod, she whispered, I want it. Emotion punched Ethan straight in the chest. He squeezed her hands gently. Then we're in this together. News traveled fast. The next morning, the courtroom was more crowded than expected. Reporters lingered outside, drawn by whispers of a tech giant caught in a messy, emotional custody case. Inside, Ethan sat stiffly beside Marcus at the front table. Across the aisle, Ms. Granger sat with two attorneys of her own, her expression tight and triumphant. Emma sat between Ethan and Marcus, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress that Miss Callahan had helped her pick out that morning, and though her face was calm, her fingers twitched nervously against the fabric. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp glasses, called the court to order. Granger's attorneys opened first, painting a cold, clinical picture. An emotionally vulnerable child, a wealthy stranger with no official claim, dangerous instability. Ethan's jaw tightened with every word. When it was Marcus's turn, he rose smoothly. Your Honor, Mr. Walker has DNA evidence pending confirmation. More importantly, we have witnesses prepared to testify to his character and to the bond he and Emma have already formed. And today, we respectfully ask that you hear from Emma herself. The courtroom murmured. The judge frowned slightly, then nodded. Proceed. Marcus knelt beside Emma's chair, speaking gently. Emma, sweetheart, can you tell the judge how you feel about Mr. Walker? Emma's small voice, steady and clear, filled the silent room. He's my family, she said. Not because he's rich, not because he's famous, but because he's the first person who stayed. She reached for her locket, holding it up toward where she thought the judge was seated. This was my mom's. She used to tell me stories about someone she loved very much, someone she lost. Emma's voice wavered, but she pressed on. I think she was talking about him. A hush fell over the room. Even the judge's stern expression softened slightly. Emma finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Family isn't about papers, it's about love. And I love him. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. When he opened them, he saw something remarkable. Ms. Granger, stiff and unbending until now, finally lowered her gaze. The faintest flicker of doubt crossing her face. It wasn't over yet. But the tide had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like an impossible dream. It felt like a promise. The judge didn't make a decision that day. Instead, she ordered a temporary arrangement. Emma would stay under Ethan's care while the court reviewed all evidence, with a full custody ruling pending. It wasn't the end, but it was a beginning. Fragile, precious, and real. When Emma stepped through the doors of Ethan's sprawling house for the first time, she froze. The space echoed with silence, cold marble floors, towering ceilings, art pieces she couldn't see but could feel looming in the vastness. She shrank back instinctively, clutching her cane tighter. Ethan knelt beside her, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry through the cavernous halls. "This place," he said, glancing around. "It's not really a home yet. Not without you." Emma tilted her head, considering his words. She couldn't see the loneliness etched into the walls, but she could feel it. The empty ache of a life too big, too polished, too untouched. She nodded slowly. "It's big," he chuckled under his breath. "Too big, maybe." A beat passed, and then, with awkward hope, he added, "Would you help me fix that?" Emma smiled, a shy, brave thing. "Okay." That first night was clumsy. Ethan burned dinner trying to follow a recipe he pulled from the internet. Emma, laughing harder than she had in years, insisted on peanut butter sandwiches instead. They sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor eating messy sandwiches off paper towels like co-conspirators. And piece by piece, room by room, they began to carve a home out of the coldness. Ethan transformed a formal sitting room into a music studio, lining the walls with shelves for Braille sheet music, adaptive instruments, and soft, welcoming furniture. He ordered a custom-built piano with keys marked gently for touch reading. He watched Emma run her fingers over the piano keys the first time, a look of wonder blooming across her face, and something in him, something buried for years, unlocked. Not everything was easy. Sometimes Emma recoiled when he raised his voice, not in anger at her, but at some careless email or business call. Sometimes she grew distant when the doorbell rang unexpectedly, or when unfamiliar voices echoed through the halls. Trust wasn't built in grand gestures. It was built in small moments, in the way Ethan always asked before touching her arm, in the way he learned to describe rooms aloud so she could picture them, in the way he sat through long, patient hours while she struggled to learn a new piece of music. Lesquels, in the way he told her, again and again, without conditions or expectations, "I'm not going anywhere." For Ethan, the greatest lesson was learning to let go of control, to let Emma move at her own pace, to make mistakes, to have bad days without trying to fix everything. For Emma, the greatest challenge was believing that someone could see her, really see her, and choose to stay. Slowly the walls between them thinned. One afternoon, as winter began to thaw into spring, Ethan found Emma in the garden. She sat on a bench, face tilted toward the sun, her fingers moving across a small Braille book. He approached carefully, not wanting to disturb her peace. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. She turned her head toward him, smiling. Without a word, she scooted over on the bench, a silent invitation. He sat beside her, the sun warming their faces. The silence between them filled not with fear or uncertainty, but with something solid and strong. Home, family, love. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the simple, extraordinary perfection of it. He knew there were still battles ahead, court dates, legal hurdles, moments of doubt. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid, because whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was everything. The date for the final custody hearing loomed closer. Ethan worked late into the nights, gathering every piece of evidence Marcus needed. Emails, old letters, sworn testimonies. Miss Callahan agreed to testify, her voice steady and fierce when she swore under oath that Ethan's presence had transformed Emma's world. Even Daniel, the ever-pragmatic assistant, took the stand, recounting late-night calls, desperate meetings, and the sheer devotion he had witnessed firsthand. Still, Ms. Granger wasn't giving up easily. In a final attempt to sway the court, she submitted a damning report. A psychological evaluation suggesting that Emma was too emotionally fragile to handle such a dramatic change, that it would be safer for her to remain in state care until adulthood. Ethan seethed as Marcus laid the report on his desk. "They're using her blindness and her trauma as weapons," Marcus said, voice cold, "painting her as too broken to choose her own family." "Eh?" Ethan pushed the report away. "We fight." Marcus nodded. "We fight." At home, Ethan chose not to tell Emma the full details. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he trusted her strength too much to burden her with unnecessary fear. Instead, he focused on filling her days with warmth and stability. On the eve of the hearing, Ethan found Emma sitting at the piano, her fingers ghosting over the keys without pressing them down. She wasn't playing, just feeling. He sat beside her quietly, waiting. After a long moment she spoke. "Are you scared?" she asked. He hesitated, then told her the truth. "Yeah, a little." Emma smiled, a small secret thing. "Me too." Ethan chuckled under his breath. "Good, we can be scared together." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that only existed between people who trusted each other completely. Finally, Emma reached out, her small hand finding his. "No matter what happens tomorrow," she said, squeezing his fingers gently, "you're already my family." Ethan swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "And you're mine," he said hoarsely. That night, neither of them slept much. But when the dawn broke over the city, painting the skyscrapers in gold and rose, they rose together, ready to fight not just for custody, but for the life they had already begun to build. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. They would walk into that courtroom not as strangers bound by blood, but as a family forged by love, resilience, and the stubborn, extraordinary belief that some bonds are stronger than fate. The courthouse was packed when Ethan and Emma arrived. Cameras flashed outside the building. Reporters shouted questions he ignored. He wasn't here as a CEO today. He wasn't here as a public figure. He was here as a father. Emma clutched his hand tightly as they walked through the heavy wooden doors, her cane tapping a steady rhythm beside them. Inside the courtroom, the air crackled with tension. Ms. Granger sat across the aisle, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her attorneys shuffled papers, preparing for a brutal fight. The judge entered, her robe sweeping behind her, and everyone rose. The hearing began. "Ms." Granger's attorney opened with a fierce argument. Ethan Walker had no prior relationship with the child. The emotional risk to Emma was too great. Stability mattered more than sentiment. Ethan forced himself to remain calm, even as every word landed like a blow. When Marcus rose to speak, he didn't try to paint Ethan as a hero. Instead, he painted the truth. He spoke of missed chances, of lost time. He spoke of a man who had built empires but never stopped mourning what he lost. A man who, given a second chance, chose love over everything else. Then he called Miss Callahan to the stand. The kindly foster mother stood straight and proud, her voice unwavering. "Emma is not fragile because she's blind," she said firmly. "She's strong because she's blind. She doesn't need protection from love. She needs someone who believes she deserves it." Ms. Granger shifted uncomfortably at the words. Finally, Marcus called Ethan. Ethan stood, every eye in the room trained on him. He didn't read from the carefully prepared statement. Instead, he spoke from his heart. "I can't change the past," he said, his voice rough. "I can't undo the years we lost. But I can promise her this. From today on, she will never wonder if she matters. She will never wonder if she's alone." He turned slightly, addressing the judge directly. "She's not an obligation. She's not a mistake I need to fix. She's my daughter. She always was." He sat back down, his heart pounding. The courtroom held its breath. The judge shuffled her papers slowly, deliberately. Then she looked up. "Emma?" she said gently. "Would you like to speak?" The room tensed. This hadn't been planned. Ethan leaned toward her. "Only if you want to," he whispered. Emma nodded and stood. The bailiff brought her to the witness stand. She reached out and touched the rail lightly, finding her place. The judge smiled encouragingly. "Whenever you're ready, sweetheart." Emma turned her face toward the sound of the judge's voice. "I don't know much about rules," she began. "I don't know about courts or laws, but I know about people." She paused, gathering her strength. "I know that people leave sometimes, even when they promise not to, and I know that sometimes people come back." Her fingers fiddled with the locket around her neck, the gesture small but powerful. "He came back," she said simply. "When he didn't have to. When it was hard. He stayed." Tears pricked Ethan's eyes. He bowed his head, breathing slowly through the overwhelming emotion. Emma's voice grew stronger. "I used to think family was something you lost forever. But I don't believe that anymore." She reached one hand out slightly, palm up, trusting that Ethan would be there. And he was. He rose quietly, crossing the floor to her side, taking her hand in his without hesitation. The judge watched them for a long moment. Then she spoke. "In the matter of Emma Hayes's custody, the court finds in favor of Mr. Ethan Walker. Full and permanent guardianship is hereby granted." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the room like a starting gun. It was over. It was just beginning. Cheers broke out among the small group of Ethan's supporters. Ms. Granger sat stiffly, her face unreadable. But Ethan didn't see any of it. He only saw Emma, beaming up at him through sightless eyes that saw more than most people ever could. He knelt beside her, his voice thick. "You're really stuck with me now," he teased gently. Emma laughed, a bright, pure sound that filled the courtroom like music. "Good," she whispered, throwing her arms around him. And as he held her tightly, Ethan realized something extraordinary. He hadn't saved her. She had saved him, in ways he never could have imagined. And together, they were going to build a future stronger than anything the past had tried to steal from them. Together, they were home. Spring arrived quietly in Willow Grove. The sharp bite of winter faded into warm breezes and blooming dogwoods. The city softened under a blanket of green, and life, in its quiet, stubborn way, began again. Ethan and Emma settled into a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. It wasn't always perfect. There were missteps, growing pains, mornings when nothing went right. But it was real. It was theirs. Ethan learned to navigate school meetings, Braille lessons, and the endless patience required to teach a child how to trust when the world had given her so little reason to. Emma learned to let someone love her without expecting them to leave. One afternoon, a package arrived at their doorstep. The final confirmation of the court's ruling. Legal, official, permanent. Ethan Walker was now, without question, her father. He handed the envelope to Emma, smiling as she ran her fingers carefully over the raised letters of her new identification card. Her name, Emma Hayes Walker. She laughed, a pure, bright sound, and held the card close to her heart. Later that evening, they sat side by side on the porch, listening to the cicadas hum and the distant city lights blink into life. "Hey, Dad," Emma said, testing the word like a new song. Ethan's heart nearly burst. "Yeah, kiddo?" She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thanks for finding me." Ethan tightened his arm around her, his voice rough with emotion. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for letting me." They stayed like that for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one. A sky full of second chances, shining just for them. Together. Home. At last. 1 year later, a small crowd gathered at Willow Grove Community Center. Emma sat at the grand piano Ethan had donated, her fingers flying over the keys with confidence and joy. The audience listened, spellbound, as music poured from her, a song full of hope, resilience, and love. In the front row, Ethan watched with quiet pride, his heart fuller than he ever thought possible. When the final note faded, Emma stood, turned toward where she knew he sat, and smiled. She couldn't see the tears shining in his eyes, but she didn't have to. She already knew. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional journeys like Emma and Ethan's. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about the people who choose to stay, who choose to love. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of their story moved you the most? Leave a comment below. Your voice matters here. And remember, second chances can create the most beautiful beginnings.